Fast and Furious 11 is apparently coming out next year, but the lack of updates about the film has me worried. It's no secret that the Fast and Furious franchise has had many ups and downs. For example, the first few Fast and Furious movies were primarily focused on street racing, until Tokyo Drift bombing at the box office led to the franchise focusing more on action. Since this major change took place, some movies in the franchise have been well received, while others were panned by audiences and critics. Fast 5 and Furious 7 are examples of movies that performed quite well with both critics and audiences. However, personally, I like 2023's Fast X better than either of these entries. Ever since watching the ending of Fast X in theaters, I have desperately wanted the next entry in the long-running series. The upcoming Fast and Furious 11 is even more exciting since it is supposedly the final movie in the franchise. However, I'm starting to get really worried about Fast and Furious 11 since we have gotten barely any updates on the movie. Fast X made Fast and Furious 11 a necessary film for the franchise's future. Fast X had an intense cliffhanger ending. Most movies in the Fast and Furious franchise end with the main story of the film mostly wrapped up. While all the films leave the door open for a future movie, the franchise arguably could have ended with various entries. This is especially the case with Furious 7, The Fate of the Furious, and F9. The 8th and 9th movies, in particular, both end with all the characters gathered together at a barbecue. However, this is not the case with Fast X, which is one of the only movies in the series to end on a cliffhanger. Throughout Fast X, Dom and his crew are going up against Dante, who is seeking revenge for the death of his father in Fast 5. Unlike all the other films in the series, which sees the main characters come out on top, Dom and his crew actually lose to Dante at the end of Fast X. Even though Dom escapes the explosion in the dam at the end of the 10th movie, he witnesses a plane which is carrying Roman, Tej, Ramsey, and Han go down. Therefore, Dom is left very hopeless at the end of Fast X. While Dom technically loses to Dante in Fast X, major characters like Dwayne Johnson's Luke Hobbs and Gal Gadot's Giselle Yasha return at the end of the movie. Dante will be going after these two characters in Fast and Furious 11, as well, but at least they can potentially help Dom come out on top in the final film of the franchise. Because of all these cliffhanger, there is no choice but to make Fast and Furious 11, which will hopefully resolve all of these plot points in a satisfying manner. Development on Fast and Furious 11 has been unexpectedly quiet after Fast X. Fast and Furious 11 has still not started filming. After the release of Fast X, Fast and Furious 11 was scheduled to be released in April 2025. If this worked out, the Fast and Furious franchise would already have ended. This release date initially seemed realistic, but Fast and Furious 11 ultimately ended up getting delayed as a result of the 2023 Hollywood strikes. Because of this, the final movie in the series is now supposed to hit theaters in June 2026. Despite a new release month being announced, barely any updates about Fast and Furious 11 have come out over the last few months. Vin Diesel has posted some vague teasers about the movie on social media, but there still haven't been many official updates about the status of Fast and Furious 11. Currently, Fast and Furious 11 is scheduled to start shooting this summer, but an exact month has not been announced. This is strange, and suggests that there are potentially some behind-the-scenes hurdles that the cast and crew of the movie are trying to overcome. Fast and Furious 11 has to be done right if it's ending the franchise. A satisfying ending won't be easy for Fast and Furious 11 to pull off. It's not necessarily a bad thing that Fast and Furious 11 is taking longer to enter production than some other movies in the franchise. After all, the studio shouldn't rush to end the series if Fast and Furious 11 truly is going to be the final film. I would much rather wait longer and get the best movie possible than receive a rushed, underwhelming final entry. However, it just doesn't seem like the studio had a solid plan for Fast and Furious 11 after making Fast X, which is strange, since Fast X has such a massive cliffhanger ending. One would think that the creative team behind the film knew exactly where they wanted to take things in the follow-up. Based on the fact that there have hardly been any updates about Fast and Furious 11, it doesn't seem like this is the case. This worries me even more, since Fast and Furious 11 needs to wrap up the franchise in a satisfying manner. If it doesn't, then it could affect the legacy of Fast X, which I really like, as well as other standout movies in the series. It doesn't seem like there's a plan for Fast and Furious ending to me. Fast and Furious ending may be sloppy. It seemed like the Fast and Furious franchise had a lot of momentum after the release of Fast X. In addition to Fast and Furious 11, a new Hobbs spin-off movie was also announced. This made perfect sense, since Johnson returned in the post-credits scene of Fast X. However, just like Fast and Furious 11, no more updates have been provided about the Hobbs spin-off, which makes me think it may no longer be happening, especially since Johnson has recently been cast in several other movies. Overall, it seems like there was no concrete plan for the future of the franchise after Fast X, which is a problem. Even before the release of the film, Diesel announced that Fast X was the first movie in a three-part conclusion. However, he eventually took those comments back. Because of this, I don't know what to believe from the cast and crew of the Fast and Furious movies. Therefore, even though it's a shame to admit, especially since I really enjoyed Fast X, I'm currently very worried about the status of Fast and Furious 11.